Can you guys see it? Okay, boys. So I'm gonna start this off with you get three guesses. You get three guesses on what we're doing today. First clue, though. I'm gonna give you one clue. What do Mother Teresa's titties, a swastika, and Stalin all have in common?
Putin's touched all of them.
Putin's touched all of them.
They're angry.
Okay. So Mother Teresa's titties.
Mother Teresa's tits are angry. They're angry.
Stop helping kids, and start having kids. Okay. This is a Russian proverb. Not everyone who carries a knife is a cook.
Okay.
What you got
that
for
had to
me?
do with Mother Teresa's tits?
Oh, you'll learn real quick.
Waiting on you.
All
Presentation
right.
time.
Nobody's got anything? Okay.
Oh, got it.
If Lenin had shot more criminals and hired fewer, we might have seen a very different Soviet Union. Soviet police officer, 1991.
August Q, 1991. I don't know.
All right. Share my screen here.
The Russian Mafia.
Bingo! Wow, look at Chad.
Oh, didn't I call it?
That's why I said it. I was like, he's not going to say it, but I'm going to say it.
All right.
Yes. We can see your future.
Yeah, Billy Idol gets it.
Yeah, Billy Idol gets it. Nobody touches Billy. So, the Vorisakunya. All right, so we're going to be talking about the Russian Mafia, and you're probably wondering, what is Mother Teresa's tits, Hitler, a swastika, and Stalin all have in common? Those are tattoos you can get if you were in the Vori. But, so the word Vori actually means thief. So like in the late 1800s, what they would do is they would go out and they would steal horses from other villages and then bring them back to their village to try and sell or make some money. So that's where it like originates. And then from there, you have the whites versus the reds. You have communism taking over Russia, and all these dudes are pretty much all sent to the gulag right away. So in the gulag, you can't really carry anything in between, right? So they're essentially work camps. And as they're in the work camps, they need a way to like build their resume or like show what they did. So they get tattoos. And like you can see that, like, can you see this right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like,
Yeah, where are the tits at? Oh, okay.
Oh yeah, you see the titties there? So like the tattoos on his knees are like stars, which denote he'll never bow to anybody. And then he's got the shackles with the cowbells, so he's obviously done like hard labor. And then he's got the titties out, and the titties are there because this is like early 1900s. So if you had like Mother Teresa's tits or like a swastika or something on you, you're basically shunned from society. So this dude would be like super dedicated to the mafia or the Vori.
What about the cello?
What?
What about the
that
cello?
was just proposing. Yeah,
that's proposing. Yeah, that's proposing. So
I was
it's
kind of
like,
hoping that was like his weapon of choice.
I was about to say,
with the fucking cello.
I wish he had like a sweet name. Like he just like sees you right there and you turn around because you see him in the mirror and he's just like cello, and then he hits you with the fucking cello.
Perfect. That's how you
Like,
go out.
They call him the cello. Well, they do have nicknames. So
If
his
he's not the
dude,
cello, then I don't know what to call him.
this is actually Bob. Like, I've killed people for years with this cello, and you've never called me the cello. No, and so
He's like, this isn't some prop.
yeah, I'm trying. Like, it's
It's
like
all serious. I've beaten 6 men to death with this, and everybody's just laughing at him. Like,
I wouldn't be called the cello. You'll be.
So, Cody, did the communists target these guys pretty early on, and once they see Czar?
Yeah, because I mean, everybody owns everything in Russia, which means essentially nobody owns anything. But they're crimes against the people, right? So like, you can't steal and then black market sell things. like, steal a horse, steal a cow, and then sell it, because that would be capitalism. And so these guys like needed to go. And plus, they're tattooed, they're undesirables, nobody wants them. And so all the time they'd be looking for these dudes if they could get their hands on them, because they just bounce around from prison system to prison system. The other thing I will say is like when, because of this, when World War II kicked off, basically the communists would come into the prison system and they'd be like, hey, who wants to go fight on the Eastern Front? And they would call you a Suki or a bitch if you tried to join. Yeah. You would have to, if you joined the army, you were a bitch. So like these guys were not only like anti-establishment, anti-communism, but they're like anti-everything. Like the only thing you care about is the gang. So if you were in the army
Fucking
or
emo.
yeah, you're so part of the proletariat and the establishment. God, like there's just like you're either in or you're out. Like there's no like, well, I was in the army for a while. Like, no, that doesn't count. They don't care if you were in the army.
Imagine being a German soldier in like Poland and you're being confronted with the bitch battalion. I'd be pretty intimidated.
The bitch
Cellos.
Watch out, boys.
You gotta get that picture off there, bro. Like, I'm gonna keep going back to cello.
Right.
That shit's gonna.
So like, yeah, like, tattoos like this to like piss off grandma and your mom. So you can see right here, he's got like pictures of Stalin and Lenin on him. The belief was that, and it was slightly real, is that if you had pictures of Stalin and Lenin on your chest and you went to the firing squad, somebody would have to shoot a picture of Stalin or Lenin. How many people do you think
None.
fucking did that? Yeah,
None.
I was about to say.
None.
So like,
Not a single one.
yeah,
Not a single recorded
They
incident.
shoot you in the fucking head. That's exactly what they do. They have to fucking shoot you in the
Yeah.
head.
so like this guy's got like an Orthodox like piece of cherubs on his chest, but then he's got a swastika and like titties hanging out. It's like literally, how bad of a tattoo can you get so that the people around you don't want to hang out with you is literally the goal of their tattoos. Now the other piece is that it tells history. So like prison tattoo artists were considered like record keepers. So like as you get more and more tattoos or you do certain things or like certain work camps, like you get more tattoos. So like this dude had like, there was one in the book, it's called the Vori, but there's one where it's like an anchor with chains around it. So he was in the Navy and he served time in a Navy prison camp is what it does. And if you get a tattoo that you didn't earn, they will cut that piece of flesh off, like not even
Nice.
questioning. And if you were a tattoo artist that worked for the Vori, they'd make sure you stay fed and everything, but you were in, like you couldn't go and tattoo other people. You only gave your little shitty tattoos to the gangsters. And so during the time of like World War II, these guys are being moved around from camp to camp. And so the only thing that tells a story is their tattoos. So it's kind of like your resume. And like I said, the more tattoos you have, the more shitty tattoos you have, like swastikas and Mother Teresa's titties or whatever, you can't go back into society. You're in the gang, so you stay there. And so the World War II happens. Obviously, the committed Vori stay in the gulags, or they get out and they go do gangster stuff and then come back. But essentially, all it is like either the gulags or stealing stuff and coming back to the gulags. But afterwards, so Russia wins. People get sent back to the gulags. The dudes the Suki, the bitches who left to join the army, and they were gangsters and they come back, they're still Suki. So they're still Suki, whatever. They're still bitches. So you have this divide, right? Like you have all the guys who stayed in the prison system who are like, I'm not joining the army. I'm not doing shit you tell me to, gang. And then you have the dudes who left and came back. But the amount of people who came back to the gulags was way more than were involved in the gulags. So you have like, for every Russian gangster, you have like 8 people who are considered bitches, and it's kind of hard to beat them. So the Russian gangsters realize like, oh shit, we're in trouble. So they start working with the prison camp guards to protect themselves and give themselves like weapons and stuff and start being in charge of all the bitches. And then what happens is called the Bitches War, or the Vori Sakunya. So you probably heard that. It's where the bitches and the gang fight it out. And the original Vori, the original gangsters all pretty much died because it was 8-1. And then this goes on, right? Like the gangsters pretty much run the black market within the Soviet Union. If you need bread, if you need toilet paper, if you need anything in the Soviet Union, you have to go to the Vori because they're the only ones who can find and steal shit and then sell it to you. And if they're not in there, they're in the gulags.
Wait, can we go back to the bitch war? So the gangsters that stayed behind at the gulags thought that it would be a good idea to like confront all these war veterans that just got back from like some of those atrocious fighting in World War II.
I was about to say, like 100%. That's exactly what they thought. They thought
like these battle-hardened soldiers that were fighting the Nazis.
They're like, we got this, boys.
We could definitely take on these guys, even though they're, it's 8-1 odds against us. And all these guys have combat experience, and none of us do. Like they actually thought that they could fight a war against them. That's hilarious.
Yep, 100%. And so like they get their asses handed to them. Who saw that one coming? Like fucking. And so
does that mean that the gangsters that joined the Red Army and then went back to the gulags and kind of went back to the gangs, they ended up taking over the gangs ultimately?
I mean, in this time period, I would say, because it's kind of hard to confirm because there is no records, right? Their records are their tattoos. I would say yes, because the Vori at this point is built on might equals right. So whoever's the strongest and has the most men he's the shit. He's the boss. And there really isn't like, don't think of this as like the Mafia, right? Like this isn't a structured pyramid. It's very loose. So like at this moment, they only know each other by like their tattoos and stuff. So like I would imagine that if you were a war veteran and your entire unit got, called cowards and you all go to the fucking gulag or you go to the work camps, like obviously rank doesn't matter anymore. Nothing matters except who's the strongest and who's the smartest. And so if you had like a sergeant who was the biggest, baddest motherfucker and his entire platoon is in the work camp and you're some emo gangster, like I've got tattoos, like fuck you, like you're done. Like you're so done. And so, yeah. And then, but I mean, this system continues on like well into for the entirety of communism. But as communism starts to fumble and it starts to collapse, we start to see the Vori change from a gang of guys with tattoos and they just kind of break the law and they only care about themselves. And they start to take like the first step towards modern day Vori or Russian Mafia, as like somebody would call it. And so the first thing they do is they kind of bring down the tattoos, right? Like you don't need to be tattooed up to your neck. It's really hard to do business in like the 1980s and 1990s with tattoos all over you. And it's very hard to hide when you have tattoos all over you, right? And so they start dressing up, covering down, not so many tattoos. They start to use like kind of like what's that thing where they how like in Muslim Middle Eastern countries they have that banking system? What's that called? Do any of you know what I'm talking about?
No, I'm not sure.
I do not.
Well, like in like Middle Eastern countries, they like give money to like this one guy and he gives them a slip and they take that slip and they go to like, let's go say from like Iraq to Syria, and they turn that slip into the guy in Syria and then they get their cash back. And it's like really hard to track terrorists financially because of this system. It's incredibly hard. The same thing starts to happen with the Russian Mafia. Like they don't do tattoos anymore. It's all word of mouth. One guy even quoted it as saying like modern day Russian Mafia are just like fake groups of Facebook friends. Like there's no structure. There's nothing to it really. It's like, oh, I know Matt's got guns. He's a good guy. I'll vouch for him. And then like, Stefan comes in and he's like, I heard you were a good dude for guns, and it's all word of mouth and not as many tattoos and stuff like that, because honestly, they're just getting cracked down on. And it's really hard for them to maneuver in the Soviet Union. And around this time in like the 1980s and 90s, where they're starting to change, you have tons of war vets, right? Like the Afghanistan war just got done. And so there's like subsections of Russian mafia starting to be created. Like there is to this day, I believe in Moscow, a subsection of Russian paratroopers that still protect the local businesses and veteran-owned businesses. If you read the book The Vori, there's one incident where a guy tried to rob a old Russian paratroopers like kiosk, and he was missing a leg, and like the next day they had him hanging by like a street pole. Like there's
on that. They so in a book called
learn,
Zinky Boys, which is about Afghans, the Soviet-Afghan war, and has interviews with soldiers who came back. It talks about that briefly. It doesn't distinctly say the Vori or anything, but it says like, yeah, they kind of came back and took care of their own. They became their own little niche communities because that's just how they operated. So it's kind of funny to see the different angles of the average Soviet soldier going to Afghanistan, coming back, and then bleeding into this more organized or disorganized crime syndicate simply because they're like, hey, we'll take one hand watches the other, both wash the face kind of thing. So
yeah.
it's real fun.
Yeah, 100%. And so like, I mean, you're in a communist country, which already there's very limited access to funding and you know, like entrepreneurship or anything for veterans. Like no veterans coming home from the Afghan war like, I can't wait to start my coffee t-shirt company. Like fucking he can't. So the only thing he knows is violence, and he's really good at it. So but so you can see how they've morphed from like tattooed covered like John Wick style guys to now they've kind of settled it down. They're putting on business suits, and then communism falls, right? You get like the heyday of Russian mafia, and essentially
these guys are just Yeltsin's bodyguards. Come on.
Yeah, these is just Belarusians. I don't this photo
this is
taken,
the plot of John Wick. I've seen this before.
This was taken yesterday. Like
is that Crimea? Look.
Yeah, right. Like, dude, this is like the style. In fact, I think these guys are better dressed than modern day Russians. No, and so like this the Soviet Union falls and everything's up for sale. And hold on one second. There's
real quick, these guys are dressed like like the Clash from the 80s. So they really doubled down on the punk aesthetic from the West.
I like that. On Netflix, there's a really great documentary that talks about this. It's called Operation Odessa, and it's about a Russian dude in Florida who had contacts back in Russia, and he was so involved with like the fall of communism and like the Russian mafia that he was able to get a nuclear sub. And the only question when he was trying to buy it for the South, like they were trying to buy a nuclear sub for South American drug cartels. The only question they asked him once he told them, like, we have the money to buy this sub for worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they asked him, do you want nukes or no nukes? Like, these guys are the fucking shit right now. Like, this is the pinnacle of what you would think the Russian mafia are in the 1990s. They have guns, helicopters, motorcycles, submarines. If you name it and it's Russian, they can get their hands on it. And plus, they still have kind of their roots of violence. And so they know what they're doing. They can. There's no CSI crime scene. Nobody's gonna tattletale on them. They can buy and sell whatever they want. And since they're the only guys who ran the black market during communism, they have all the fucking money. So
this is I don't know if you guys seen the movie Lord of War, but it talks about this, that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian mafia had everything. So they would go to naval yards of ships and destroyers and tanks and aircraft. They're like, you want to hide? How many? Like,
yep,
it's crazy stuff.
So do these guys become the Russian oligarchs, or are they tied in with the oligarchs?
100%. These are so every Russian. So let's say you're under communism, right? You don't get anything except the bare minimum wage, which is $7.25 an hour. You do that until you're like 40 or 50. You've only accumulated a set amount of money. How are you supposed to come up with hundreds of millions of dollars when the Soviet Union's collapsed? How do you come up with hundreds of millions of dollars to buy there's a book on this. I've got it here. How do you come up with hundreds of millions of dollars to buy a gas company or oil wells or any of that? There's a book called The New Czar by Stephen Lee Myers. It's about Putin's entire life. And they talk about this because Putin's involved in this area. Like he was the mayor of St. Petersburg or in and around that time of the fall. And so he was issuing business license to people so that they could operate businesses. And as the mayor of St. Petersburg, Putin was in charge of selling these companies. So let's say Matt comes to me and he's like, I want to buy the Western oil fields. And Putin's like, well, it's going to be $5 billion. And then Stefan, my partner from judo, that's how Putin sold his companies. Like all of his judo partners got the deals. And the only way they could come up with that money was through black market sales as the Russian mafia. So essentially, whenever all the for sale signs went up, the only people who had money were these guys. So now there's another thing that comes in here, and that's the book, The Outlaws. It's about, I think I've mentioned it before. It's the IL-76 or the Aleutian 76. It's this beautiful, monstrous bird. It's like a C-17. It is huge. It is incredibly big. It just, if you're military or anything, it's a C-17 for all intents and purposes. But the cool thing about this thing, though, is that it's built by the KGB. So it's got, if you look at the blueprints for the IL-76, that is the blueprints that the KGB gave to the FAA. So when customs checks an IL-76, they only know to check what the KGB told them to check. This thing can carry like an extra 20 tons worth of cargo secretly. And so now you've got a bunch of pilots who are working for the Soviet Union. By the way, these things are made in Ukraine. A bunch of Ukrainians who are no longer Russian, who work for the Russian or the USSR Air Force. They have no more jobs, but they do have a cargo plane. A cargo plane that has like 20 tons of extra storage. Oh, by the way, this cargo plane is built like an AK. It can take a beating. It can take a beating so well that it can take off from practically fucking anywhere. Open fields of grass. It does not need a tarmac. It was actually specifically designed so that it could land in like Ukrainian wheat fields, farmland. Like it's just a workhorse of a bird. And you see it everywhere. And so you've got Russian mafia free to sell whatever they want. You've got a huge cargo fleet of planes. Nobody's going to stop them. And you've got all this merchandise to sell.
Are these things escorted by any other aircraft, or do they just fly on their own?
They fly on their own.
Just
amazing. I was about to say, you posted it. 4 IL-76s landed in Kabul as a UN peacekeeping ordeal. Do you remember that? You posted it?
Yeah, it was a few weeks ago, and it was pretty intense because they showed up there like, all right, who needs what? Here you go.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. So these guys are completely independent contractors. So they go into the UN and they take the contract. So like, let me give you an example of this. In 2003, we were building Kandahar Airfield. And if you've ever been to Kandahar, it's just a huge open desert surrounding the place. And they didn't have a runway because it was completely bombed to shit. And they needed to deliver AC units to the base. And so these Ukrainians who had an IL-76 were like going through the paperwork, and they found out like there is no way, like the US contract to deliver these AC units in Kandahar was so low, so abysmal, like it just horrible. Like there was no way you could even pay for the jet fuel almost to get back, not including maintenance hours and all this stuff. So what they did, these IL-76 crews did, is they pieced together an IL-76 from spare parts. And keep in mind, it's 2003. Like they put just enough flares in the tail end for one Stinger missile if the Taliban had a Stinger missile. And they are Soviet Union vets from the war in Afghanistan, so they know the area. And so they flew in 2003, these AC units on an IL-76 The wheels popped off, engines weren't working. I think it was like they were down to like 2 engines on one side. They land, the tail falls off, and they just bust these AC units off. And the American commander's like, "Oh man, how are you going to take off?" And they said, "We're not." And then immediately a group of local tribal elders with like AKs and guns show up to pick these guys up. And so the IL-76 crew just walks away with basically the Taliban after delivering the AC units, and they left this piece of junk IL-76 down there in Kandahar.
That's crazy. I've heard of the story. A few years ago, I heard of the story of, it was it was early in the Afghan war, and this Russian aircraft drops off, opens the doors. There was bottles of vodka falling out. The pilots may or may not have been drunk. The crew was just kind of disaggregated. They went, "All right, later." It's really funny to hear the story, because I've always had this like in the back of my mind going, there must be something else.
Nope.
There must be an origin to the story, because there's not some officer going, "Yeah, this one time this Russian guy showed up, gave us a bunch of stuff and left." But it's really funny to hear the actual story.
Yeah, they left that thing sitting there for some like logistics captain to figure out in 2003. Like, bye. Like, fucking.
The contractors, they were paid to fly there, not go home. So.
Yeah. Yep. The contract was just so low that they couldn't afford to go home on the plane. So they just they flew this piece of junk IL-76 into Afghanistan and just fucking left it so that they could make a buck off this. Like, that's how, like, they will figure out, they're the guys to figure out a way. So if you ever see an IL-76, there is, as Chad makes fun of me for, there are 10 layers deep. Like, these guys literally have an extra 20 tons of cargo that they can deliver. And so in the book Outlaws by Matt Potter, he talks about how these guys will get contracts for UN peacekeeping missions in South Africa, or all over Africa. And they'll go to Africa on a UN dime to deliver food, but they've got 20 tons of extra cargo. So the Russian mafia will just fill that extra 20 tons or whatever full of guns, ammunition, and sell that to the local warlords. And then they can fill up the plane with whatever they want. And then the UN will pay for them to come home. So those 4 planes that landed in Afghanistan, they landed in Afghanistan, and then they had all that extra hidden cargo that they could give to the Taliban. But if you read the book, The Dark Art, or Narconomics, you know the Taliban are involved with heroin. And so they can stuff 20 tons of heroin in the bottom, but I mean, the Taliban is the customs, right? So they can fill up their entire plane with heroin and fly back to Russia if they want, or wherever. 4 C-17s filled tit to ass with heroin. Does that make so
multiple countries would be watching if an aircraft like this entered airspace. I went, all right, there must be an underlying agenda. I look at this going, okay, there's something else going on. There's no reason the aircraft just entered some airspace on a humanitarian mission. There's something else going on.
Well, that's the thing. Like, there's not many, like, Interpol can't catch these guys, right? Like, there's nothing. But the beauty of it is there's a place called Al Quwan in the United Arab Emirates. The guy doesn't care where you're from, what you do. Like, it's pretty much like at this place in the UAE. Once again, it's Al Quwan, Quwain. It's like the Sultan of this area just doesn't care. He's like, you can do whatever you want. Like, the tail number on the back of this IL-76 is Russian, but he'll let you buy a tail number off of him or whatever. So you don't even know it's an IL-76 until it's landing there. And they're Afghan trained vets, so they know how to fly under the radar. And their favorite thing to do is to go into Africa where there's no FAA regulations or radars, and then come out at like a different angle and pretend to be a different bird. And
question how many times this aircraft has been in Libya, because the Russians are heavily involved there. And I'm certain that these guys have been used to move to and from multiple times. It's interesting.
Yep. Read the book out. It's called the Outlaws. It's on Audible. It's insane. Like, these guys get away with everything. But this is like this is the Air Force of the Russian mafia, and these guys can deliver goods and bring back goods as much as they want. In fact, there was these guys were working with the Russian mafia because there were sanctions put on Russia and Belarus by Italy for cheese, and people really wanted cheese, so they filled these IL-76s with cheese. And like at one point, at a customs check, they found just like stored bins of cheese, like tons and tons of cheese. And the pilots and the guy, the receiving end, all got thrown in jail by Interpol. Like they are, it doesn't have to be guns. It doesn't have to be heroin. It can be anything that the Russians or the Belarusian people want. These planes are going to get it, deliver it to the mafia, and the mafia is going to sell it. And so that brings us to the next part is heroin. One of the biggest things. So you've got Afghan vets, Russian Afghan vets who served in Afghanistan. They know there's heroin there. The Russian mafia has it locked down because it's the entire Afghan heroin trade, which produces 95% of the heroin used and sold in Europe, is completely controlled by the Russian mafia. And they've had that ever since the fall of communism, because you have these IL-76 Air Force vets that can land. They know Bagram like the back of their hand. They know how to land in Pakistan. They don't need a runway. As long as they got a strip of land, they can land it. And so the entire Afghan heroin trade, if it's going into Europe, is run by the Russian mafia. So I'm not going to get too deep into it because one day we may want to talk about the Taliban heroin trade. But because the Taliban own so much of the heroin, they're like the OPEC of heroin dealers. And because the Russians have a monopoly on the European distribution, it's pretty much like an endless supply of income. So then you get income. Yeah, passive income. Yeah. So what do I want to do next? So like you've got subsections of the Russian mafia. Like right here, we're looking at Chechens. Like, God, look at those steroided out pecs. Oh God, I need to get on some gear.
Yeah, you can bench 225. No problem.
225. That man's benching all of our fat moms. No, so like, there's like, you don't have to be Russian to be part of the Russian mafia. You can be Chechen. I think a crime statistic from Interpol said that 5% of the USSR population was Georgian, but over 50% of criminals caught in Russian mafia interactions are Georgian. So Georgian criminals make up over half of the Russian mafia. And the Chechens are known to be the most diehard, don't give a fuck, we'll kill you on spot, because Chechnya is not going to enforce any laws. And the Taliban have made it clear that it's not illegal to grow heroin and produce heroin as long as it's not Muslims taking it, and Chechnya views it the same way. So you have these Chechen mafiosos going into Afghanistan, pulling out all this heroin and then selling it to Europeans and Christians because, you know, they're in a religious war. And so it's all fine. And so nobody messes with the Chechens. And basically, if you're in the Caucasus, there's a 50-50 shot you're going to run into the mafia. Not many Belarusians or Ukrainians are involved in the mafia. Like, they are there. Don't just that being so close to the Western Europe, it's hard to get away with criminal acts like stuffing cheese. And so pretty much the Georgians, the Chechens, anybody in the Caucasus is allowed to get away with hyperviolence. But today, when you talk about the Russian mafia, you're talking about, like Stefan said, the oligarchs, right? Like, they are no longer gun-toting criminal activists. In the book, The New Czar, Putin came into office on the back of oligarch money. They're like, hey, Putin gave us all these businesses. He sold them to us. He's cool. He'll be our buddy. And it's like, yeah, we got him elected. No, he literally turned around on day one and said, yeah, you guys better get with the program. And so they're like, what? And Putin pretty much said, you're all going to go, no more tattoos, no more violence. were like it's strictly about the money. And so they ripped every page they could out of Wall Street, and that's what they do nowadays. Like it's all about the money. It's all about the Mets, baby. But so yeah, they're not there to shoot you in the face, steal your mom's soup shop, and then run the place. They like if you were no that so like when you think about warfare, right? You think about like, oh, like there's scout platoons and then the heavy armor and the infantry come in, and it's like, nah, how the Russians like to do their warfare is like they send the Vori Sakonya into areas and they look at gangs, right? So like if they were going to take over California, God help us if they do, because I would love that.
And delete the VOD.
Delete the VOD. Yeah, no. If they were gonna take over California, they would go into like the Latin Kings or Bloods and Crips, and they'd be like, "What do you guys need?" And purely logistics. Like, you guys need guns? Okay, here's guns. You guys need heroin? Okay, here's some heroin. They don't get when the Russian mafia comes into an area, they don't look to take over a place. They look to become distributors and logistics and financiers. They want to make money, and they can, just commit violence. So they don't need to send Spetsnaz or VDV or anything like that. They can just send the Vori in there and they'll start distributing stuff. And so like when we were talking about like Donbass as an example, it's incredibly easy for them to go like, what do you guys need? Food, water, blah, blah, blah. Like, what do you need? And then they just sell it to them and they keep fighting. And anything they can get their hands on. And of course they have Russian support, right? Like the country itself is committing artillery. They are committing BMPs. But like, as I discussed earlier, like when the fight in Ukraine started, the Ukrainian Russian mafia and the Donbass Russian mafia, their sales and productivity numbers actually went up. Like they're still trading with each other as the war goes on. And so when you think about like Russia invading, the more I talk about this and think about it, it's like, I don't think the Russians are going to invade. I think it's kind of like a secondary ploy to kind of move these resources and let the black market kind of influence an area. Like we do the same thing with the CIA and special forces. Like we train up guerrilla forces and we send them in. It's just different because they can train up gangsters and mafia and drug dealers and just push it west. And so it's just another form of hybrid warfare that they can use. And to talk about that a little bit more, one of the biggest cyber threats that Russia uses is tied to black market infrastructure. One of the things they like to use is a cryptocurrency called Monero. Most cryptocurrencies have a ledger. Like if you use Bitcoin, I can see where that Bitcoin goes from wallet to wallet. So if like Stefan pays Chad $100 in Bitcoin to kill me, and he kills me and they find the gun, they trace it back to Chad, they use Bitcoin to show the transaction. It's like, well, who gave him the Bitcoin? You can open up the wallet, Chad's wallet, pick the Bitcoin out, look at the ledger and see, oh, Stefan paid him the Bitcoin. And so then Stefan goes to jail. But if you use Monero has a secret ledger. So if Stefan pays Chad $100 in Monero to kill me, it stops at Chad. So the NSA has a $625,000 reward for breaking the ledger code of Monero. And so if you can open up the ledger, you can see where the Monero is going and basically see who's paid what. Like you could do anything with Monero and it can't be traced back to you because the ledger is cryptographically sealed and they use that. So no money trades hands. There's no foreign government involved. It's just the gangsters. And it's clean. It's a new way of hybrid warfare to use these guys. And they're just running logistics. There's not, like we like to put our CIA and our special forces on the front line with our indigenous personnel. Like, no, these guys literally just provide the guns, the cocaine, the heroin, and they're on their way. And so that's kind of like in a nutshell, what is the Russian mafia used to be and what do they do today?
Well, Cody, it's interesting that you said that a whole chunk of them are from either Chechnya or Georgia, because the Russian Federation fought wars in Chechnya in the early '90s to late '90s.
Yeah, 95 and then again in 2003.
Yeah, so '90s to early 2000s, right? Like this is a pretty bloody conflict. The Marine Corps put a whole the Marine Corps' Warfighting Institute put together this whole series on the Russian Federation's wars in Chechnya. All these lessons learned are really fascinating. I wish I still had it. And then Georgia too, right? They invaded Georgia back in 2008. It's interesting that a chunk, a portion of the Russian mafia is coming from countries that the Russian Federation has had armed conflict with, in the past 30 years.
Well,
I was going to say that from more of like a geopolitical standpoint, the Chechnya war was more for saying like, hey, we got to control these Muslims in our lowland regions, because if we understand that the Chechens win, other minority groups within Russia are going to want to rise up, and we can't have that. And also which is why they had the war, and it was as costly as it was. But if you look at Georgia, the president was elected single-handedly. He was an outlier. He was Ukrainian and Georgian. And I don't think a lot of people understand or know that the president of Georgia in 2004 to 2013 then became the governor of Odessa in Ukraine around the same time that the Russians annexed Crimea. But he was elected on the sole purpose of, we want Georgia to be Georgian. We want all the Russians out. We want nothing to do with secessionism. We want all that to get out of here. So if Cody's over here talking about this new way of hybrid warfare that they're going to use the mafia, someone like Putin went, absolutely not. Like, I understand Chechnya, but Georgia, if that's 50% of our base, that's not going to happen. So
it just makes you wonder, were the demographics of Chechen and Georgian mobsters, was that a byproduct of the Russians fighting those conflicts in those regions, or were they already in place part of those armed conflicts and then utilized in a way that benefited the Russian Federation?
So first up, like with Chechnya, right? Like, how did that come about? Or like, to answer your question, so you go to war with Chechnya to do exactly what Matt said. Like, we got to crush this rebellion before it gets out of hand and keep Russia. But it kind of goes to a stalemate. And then Putin puts a guy in office and says, we're going to be peaceful. I'm not going to attack you, but you're not leaving Russia. And they're like, cool deal. And it's kind of like this zone that the Chechens own. And then separatists killed that guy. And now the guy put in power by Putin is now his son who's in charge.
Properly elected.
So it's kind of, at first, it's this thing where it's like, okay, hey, we've got these guys who we kind of built a truce with. Can we do anything with them? And if you're like the KGB or you're the CIA of Russia, you've got these Russian-speaking Muslims who are respected as the ultimate warriors of the Middle East. Like, you hear Chechens are in an area, and it's like, okay, that's go time. Like, that's like the special forces of militant Islamic extremism. Like, Chechens are just the best. And so you take some of these guys, make them Russian, give them the power to do whatever they want. They can go trade in the heroin trade. They can go get guns. They can deliver guns, like anywhere in the Middle East. Like, I mean, even on our deployment in Afghanistan, not getting too into the secret weeds of it, but like, if a Chechen showed up, it was like all of a sudden the amp on those missions went to like level 10. But with Georgia was actually trying to join NATO because they were like, oh shit, we're going to get crushed by Russia. Now you can look it up. I'm actually going to Google it real quick, but
where you're talking about that, I was just going to say that, yeah, the president was elected in 2004. He's like, I want to join NATO. And he joined, or he and the president of Ukraine at the time in 2004 formally requested entry into NATO. And so when the Georgians got invaded, because, they went after the separatists, and that's when the Russians went and did their whole thing in Georgia, the president of Ukraine said, they're coming for Crimea next. We know what's going to happen. So it's, I guess, like a tidbit, like another, I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they even got a Green Beret, Peter Raphael Dabinski, Yeah, right. They had a Green Beret betray the Georgians and give up literally every military position in Georgia before the strike in, what was it, like 2008, 2009, when Russia invaded Georgia. They convinced some Green Beret to betray Georgia, and he did. He gave them everything. And so, but
Wait, what?
yeah, no, yeah.
He's
What?
got a house next to fucking,
It's so they call them hacktivists, like hacker activists, where they just get information from insiders and they're individuals online. So they use a VPN and they dial in. They're like, hey, Russian army. They just kind of give you like an envelope and like, hey, here's key terrain that the Georgians are going to use. Here's specific areas where if you strike this, the Georgians aren't going to be able to use comms. It was an 8 to 12 day war, but it all feeds one into another. Like,
Well, didn't we have Green Berets as advisors on the Georgian side at that time? Like, didn't we have some U.S. like footprint in Georgia?
we were
The Georgians were getting like, M4s, and they were getting, U.S. style looking.
They were getting that, but a lot of
camouflage.
their SF groups were being trained up in Iraq and Afghanistan around the same time that the invasion happened. So their best guys during the war were out of country. And so they had a bunch of like inexperienced conscripts being sent up a hill.
And it was also the National Guard Green Beret. It wasn't like an active duty Green Beret that betrayed them.
What happened to that guy?
Oh, that guy's in Leavenworth. He contacted them as a lieutenant, and he was a chemo officer. And if you're not familiar what chemo officers do in the Army, they literally just file paperwork. And they said, you need to go be somebody special for us to use you. And he was like, I'll go be a Green Beret. And they're like, hell yeah. And so
let's check this guy's early life on Wikipedia. Let's see where he comes from.
Oh, God damn it.
Yeah, how did the Russians get him to give up all these Georgian positions?
I was about to say he volunteered. Like he volunteered as a lieutenant and got caught almost like he was about to pin major. Like it didn't take any convincing. He pled his allegiance. But like what I was saying by that is like Georgia was actually trying to become like westernized, and Russia invaded. But after you beat the living
Isn't
shit,
that weird? That's kind of what Ukraine's trying to do right now.
yeah, can't join NATO.
What's
That's the whole
about to
point.
happen?
Well, Georgia was sending troops to help with the global war on terror, weren't they? At least with Operation Iraqi Freedom.
I was about to say they were in Bagram and they gave me like syphilis. Like, like
I don't want to ride off on the Ukraine thing again, but just so you guys know, I can't remember the exact countries that are pushing for it right now, but there's 2 countries, I'll look it up, that are pushing quite hard to make Ukraine a NATO partner, like right now, because
$20, Lithuania and Poland.
so I actually do think it's those 2, but they're actually pushing very hard to get NATO to recognize them without having to go through the process, so they'll be protected. I'm air quoting protected from Putin. Like,
well, at the same time, just to add on to that, Chad, President Zelensky of Ukraine formally requested that they break constitutional laws of Ukraine to essentially have foreign troops integrate with Ukrainian troops, which is essentially like Brits, Americans, Poles, Germans. And he's like, hey, so if we start integrating that, let's speed up the process here because there's a war going on. Not to be.
Okay, so I got information about that Army Green Beret. This is from the Army Times, November 18th, 2020. So it's former Army Green Beret pleaded guilty to divulging military secrets to Russia about his special forces unit's activities in the former Soviet republics. Peter Raphael Dabinski Devins, he's from Gainesville, Virginia. He got charged with under the Federal Espionage Act. Apparently, he had a 15-year relationship with Russian intelligence dating back to 1996 when he was an ROTC student at the University of Minnesota. He was on a visit to Russia for an independent studies program. He gave a handler there the names of 4 Catholic nuns he had visited. He went by the code name Ikar Lenenskov. He considered himself a son of Russia. So I guess he just kind of joined the Army as an active duty officer after ROTC, served from 98 to 2005. He was in special forces the last 2 years of his career. And apparently his Russian handlers were encouraging him to go down the SF route. So,
yeah.
Wow.
So, I mean,
sounds like a winner.
Yeah, just to add on, I just did wrote a post for Click News on Georgia. So I spent like 3 days digging into the '08 war.
Shameless
And
plug.
yeah, shameless plug, Cloud Click News. So the Georgians, since they formally requested to join NATO, within 2 years, they doubled the size of their military and became the most rapidly expanding military within the former Soviet bloc. And so it's one of those where it's like someone like Putin, who's been in power since '99, who understands the whole industry, understands the geopolitical structure of where Russia's supposed to go. And there's this wild card who out here wants to say like, no, Georgia's Jordan. And then what Cody's talking about is all the Russian mafia ties, it's better to see the picture, because a lot of intelligence reports or news articles talking about the '08 war never once talked about mafia. They just talk about like, oh, there was hackers and there was the first implementation of information warfare and cyber warfare in conjunction with kinetic strikes. But it's really fun to see how all this builds one on top of each other. So the narrative gets bigger. And so there's always, like you said, 10 layers deep in any major topic. So yeah, if you want to know anything about Georgia.
Yeah, well, I thought too, after the Georgia invasion by the Russian Federation, they kind of did like a scorched earth policy, didn't they? I remember there were videos of like Russian conscripts driving out like thousands of privately owned vehicles, just packed full with computers, TVs, anything they could loot from houses. And then they poured concrete into like the sewage system to essentially like fuck them over royally, right? Like,
yeah, they were trying to salt Carthage after they burned it. Like, it was nothing's going to recover here for at least 100 years. So Georgia hasn't done shit since the '08 war. They haven't said anything. So
wasn't that something you were worried about, Cody, when you bought that condo, where you thought they might pour concrete down the toilet?
Yeah. I'm not paying rent, and fuck your plumbing. Dude, and they say baby wipes are gonna back up the system. Nope. I get
two bags of concrete down to square this away.
So I guess the takeaway, Cody, is if you want to look to see where the Russian Federation is going to be, maneuvering or kind of prepping for future operations, the activities of the Russian mob will be a pretty good indicator.
Yeah. So like, let's do this. Let's go to paint real quick here.
Oh Lord. So
like, where's my paintbrush?
Okay.
Gonna grab that. Gonna make a nice little bush. Gonna make it.
Yeah, that's what I was waiting on. I was like, he's gonna go for the Bob Ross and cut.
Yeah, there's no mistakes. There's only happy accidents.
Yeah, let's do some happy accidents here.
Life's a happy accident.
So that's what my mom taught me. Fucking. So like, when you're learning about like Russian tactics and stuff, like this is all open source. You can go to an army field manual and learn this stuff. You have like the support zone, right, where all like the logistics are and the commanders hiding. And then you have the battle zone, right? This is where like all the T-72s, T-90s and stuff are. Like they get into like little entrenched positions, and like whole battalions get into this little area, and they just dig in. Like Russian doctrine is it's better to be on the defense than the offense, because our doctrine says you need 3-to-1 ratio to take out an entrenched enemy. So you can make 3 soldiers for every 1 you dig in. And then you have this place called the disruption zone, right? And this disruption zone is just like scouts full of dudes who are just out there in the wood line looking for the U.S. to come through, right? Like the U.S. is going to come through this area. They're going to run into the scouts, and then Russian artillery right here, way back in the support zone, is just going to lob you. And then as you're going through the disruption zone, you just keep getting hit harder and harder and harder. So like 120 millimeter becomes 81 millimeters and 120s. And then when you get to the battle zone, it's 60s, 81s, 120s. And so like you think like, oh, that's how Russia's going to invade you, right? They're just going to march the scouts in the battle zone and that stuff forward. But then you get then we go deeper, 10 layers deeper.
And more layers later.
Go deeper.
Yeah. So then you have what is referred to as the areas of guerrilla warfare by Mao. And so you have the guerrilla zone, right? That's a shitty G. You got the Guerrilla Zone.
That's an even better one.
Yeah, that G's got some junk in the trunk. Thicker than a Snicker. But you got the Guerrilla Zone, right? So like this would be like if we were gonna like it'd be like Pakistan, right? Like the guerrillas can walk around in the open. They're safe here. They can do whatever they want. And it's
so like Kabul. Wait.
Yeah. Well, actually it's basically the guerrillas are in the open. They can do whatever they want. And it's basically where they walk around. It's like the Panjshir Valley in Pakistan. But what you have here are like literal Spetsnaz units hanging out here, dropping more artillery. So this is where their SF guys are way in the back. And then here you have the auxiliary zone. This is like everywhere in Afghanistan is like little Taliban militias, and they don't have any support by fire. They don't have any Green Berets with them or Pakistani ISI. Oh god. But no, so the guerrilla zone, the auxiliary zone is where the dudes hang out on their own. There are no handlers. But then you have the clandestine zone, which is the like Kabul, Bagram, those big army bases that sneaky little dudes are hiding in. So, well, the American army is stationed right here. Like this would be like Bagram or whatever, or their big army base in Ukraine. They're being spied on. But then they leave and they start hitting IEDs and like little snippets of pocket fire of AK-47s, right, as they get closer to Donbass. But then they get into Donbass and then they start getting hit by special forces, Spetsnaz, and sometimes the even big high-end artillery will come in and hit this area, maybe a couple airstrikes. But then they go a little bit farther and they hit the disruption zone and they hit the scouts. And then they go a little bit farther and they hit the tanks. And then finally back here is the artillery and the ADA. And the whole time you're just getting hit by Russian artillery that can reach out here. And then you have the ADA systems that are covering pretty much this entire area. So you cannot use Air Force or anything like that in this area. But where, like what you're talking about, Stefan, is like, so where can we see is this final area? And I don't know what to fucking call it. I would just call it the Gangster Zone, because right over here, way back here where the American people are, that's where your cybercrime is. That's where, people are getting accounts hacked, like national pipelines are being held for ransom, right? Like what just happened? There was an infrastructure piece that just got hit by
the Keystone Pipeline. No, not the Keystone. The big one in the central United States. Hold on.
Yeah, it was held for
it was held for ransom.
Yeah, but then you also have psyops going on back here, like tons of stuff to piss America.
You got it right.
Yeah, tons of psyops to piss American people off. Tons of Facebook trolls and stuff like that. And then where the Russian Mafia comes in is just like Stefan said, is somewhere in here. Like they can help MS-13, they can help Blood and Crips. I mean, have you ever seen those photos of like rallies in America where big stacks of bricks just show up unannounced? Like there's just stacks of bricks showing up. Like who the fuck's doing that? Like the Russian Mafia. They just have to go buy bricks with their heroin money and piss off America. Or they can bomb bases, or they can help shoot AKs and stuff. But like, it's kind of this 10-layer deep onion that as the American army comes marching along, it just has to go through layers and layers of bullshit to get to the commander who's back here. And so that's my 10 cents.
Which is funny because going back to the Georgian War, right? I think the commander of the Russian ground force was actually killed in an ambush, like within the opening days of the war, right?
But that makes sense, right?
Like they didn't seem that affected that their commander was killed almost immediately in the fight. But somehow in the American way of viewing wars, if we get through all these layers and get to the commander, then we'll win. But then you look at the Georgian War, the Russians, like their commander was in one of the lead vehicles going into Georgia and died very quickly.
Well, you got to look at the Georgian War. It was a strategic victory, but a tactical failure. It was just a sandbox or a demo for your video game guys who went, okay, here's what we want to do. met the mark, but it was like a 75% solution. Let's dial that in. They applied that to Ukraine in 2014. A couple of years later, they modernized their force. And then that's where they started implementing like cyber warfare and I guess the gangsters. And then they tried the same thing in 2016 and 17 in the Baltic states because they went after the same message of, oh, we're protecting ethnic Russians. But I guess NATO just wasn't having that. So like the US deployed the 82nd Airborne. They just dropped into Lafayette on a dime. And then they went, okay, I guess we're going to have to wait for a little bit because going after a NATO country is a little difficult at the moment. We're going to have to think of a new method. So, yep.
Yeah. I mean, that's what they're doing in like those Baltic states right now is they're just pushing Russians into those areas. Like they've already started crying and bitching that the Baltics is like Russian. Like,
well, I know in Latvia there was rolling blackouts. I want to say in 2017 or 2018, like the winter time frame, there was rolling blackouts. And they were saying like, oh, it was cyber terrorists from Russia. And they were like, no, they're not. There's no indication or warning that there is cyber terrorists from Russia attacking Latvia. But if there were, they would be trying to protect ethnic Russians that are in Riga and these areas. So,
dang.
Yeah, what a fun podcast.
That was good, Cody.
Very chipper. Is that it? Am I done?
I think that's it. Anything else you want to cover before we wrap it up?
Shame on Matt for drinking beer instead of covering the neo-Nazis or whatever taking over DC. You suck. Fired.
Oh yeah.
But that's the Click News podcast or the Click Escape pod. Click Escape pod.
Yeah, there it is.
Click Escape.
Yeah, nothing happened there, by the way. I followed up on it. They just kind of walked around and left. So no friction between any other groups.